Now onto organising live online learning, and we've called this Be Prepared because our experience is it's all about preparation. So we've got a few screens here that are offering you some preparation tips, and I'll start with roles and responsibilities. So it's really important that you understand, if you're an organizer, that you understand the different roles of people that are participating in either your webinar or your virtual workshop, and people know what's expected of them. So organisers, if you're an organizer, you do all the pre-session organisation, you run the promotion to get your webinar out there and signed up for. During the webinar itself, you might offer in session technical support. So that might be screen sharing and handling questions, etc. You may do post-production. So by post-production, we mean if the video is recorded, then there's any editing to do on that afterwards. We edit our webinars into smaller sort of bite-sized chunks, if you like, and that's something that we do with a piece of software called Camtasia. So we handle all of that post-production, and sometimes organizers might also act as a moderator. Now, what do we mean by moderator? That's like a chair role. So if you were at a face-to-face Q&A session, the moderator would be the chair. So they would introduce the topic and the presenters at the beginning of the session, and they would also handle the questions and the answers so that the presenters can focus on presenting and answering the questions. So that's the moderator role. And often those of you who've attended a few of our Learning Live sessions will notice that Daria, myself and others in the team, we often combine those two roles of being the organizer and the moderator. Presenters we see very much as our subject matter experts. So they are people who come and present during the webinar and are there to answer questions. And the organizer role, that's the person who provides technical support, who does all of the backup. So what we try to do on our session, and we strongly advise that you do if you're organizing your own, is allow the presenters to focus on presenting. So you get them settled in so that they can concentrate on presenting and not have to worry about the questions that are coming in, etc. That's really important for a smooth webinar. Facilitators, this is specifically for virtual workshops, virtual classrooms, if you like. Facilitators are people who, that's the role of somebody who is involved in a small group discussion, a breakout room. So we have found that it works well if we have small group discussions that each one has a facilitator that's involved in the organization of the workshop. Now that takes a lot more work to do that. I'll come on to that in a second, but we found it pays off well. So here's our next set of tips. This is to do with liaising with contributors. So this is about making sure that everybody's knows what's involved. So ahead of the time, you'd want to agree with the presenters the topic and the time and date, of course, but then you want them to provide the title. You want to provide a description of the webinar so that gives a clear indication of what people can expect to learn when they attend. It's useful to have their biographies as part of that promotional material, and then you'd need to work with them on any interactivities. So you'd have to explain to them how polls would work, or quizzes, or surveys, or handouts, or any of those other things that you might run during the webinar. They'd need to prepare that, or the workshop. They'd need to prepare that material, but you'd need to work with them if you were the organizer to help them think about how these things can be used. And that's something that Dario and I spend quite a bit of time doing with our presenters, is talking to them about the kinds of ways that you can run interactivities to keep sessions interesting for people. Virtual workshops are a lot more, require a lot more planning. So it's really important that you go through the detail of the session content. You really get into what different activities are going to run at each session. They'll often be longer than webinars with more presenters, more organizers involved. They'll likely have some form of small group discussion or breakout room. They'll have exercises that happen. All of that needs planning and testing ahead of the webinar. So there's a lot to be involved in setting up a 90-minute workshop, for example. Ahead of your session, you should always do some kind of test. Now that might happen a few minutes or 30 minutes or so before a webinar, or it might be any number of weeks before a virtual workshop. So what's important is that everybody's familiar with the platform that you're using. Everybody's in agreement on how the session will run, so everybody knows what the agenda is for the session and exactly what they'll be contributing and when. It gives you a chance to check audio quality. We recommend, as Dario and I are today, that presenters always use headsets. It just is much better audio quality if that's at all possible. And just really helps presenters make sure that people are comfortable and confident in using the platform so they can focus on delivering the learning. So part of that, as I've said, is about going over the support that you'll provide them in the background so that they feel like they can focus on the learning they need to deliver. So for our webinars, we tend to do that around 30 minutes or so before the session itself runs. 30 minutes is a good amount of time to go over the agenda and to go through checking screen sharing and what have you. I would advise you against doing that in a hurry. I wouldn't do that 10 minutes before a webinar. It's just not enough time if there's any technical issues to resolve that. Where we've run virtual workshops, we're often in planning for several weeks before those. And we will run maybe 2-3 sessions to test the tech, rehearse the content, go over the exercises that we've planned, and really make sure everybody knows what's going to happen and how. And then just finally from me, scheduling and promotion, just some words of advice from the make sure you allow plenty of time to promote. We try to allow at least 6 to 8 weeks to promote our webinars. That just maximizes the amount of attendance that we get. As I've gone over, the different platforms do give you different levels of support, so bear that in mind. Also bear in mind, of course, your international audience, as Dario has touched on. So as part of sign up, consider who you're going to be reaching and who you aren't, and also just it's a good courtesy to allow people to check the time in their time zone. We tend to use Universal Standard Time for all of our webinars so that it's people can check it in their local context. When you're thinking about promotion, do think whether you are going for a specific audience and therefore you've got a particular targeted promotion to reach that audience, or whether you're going quite widely. For Learning Live in general, we have a broad promotion. So we go through all of our networks and we welcome anybody who's interested in the topic, whether they're part of Cochrane or not, or whatever their role may be. But we do run some specific targeted sessions, for example, sessions for managing editors or anybody else in a particular Cochrane role. But just think about that distinction when you think about your promotion. Use your presenters networks as well to promote. And then finally, use reminders. So GoToWebinar, you guys will have got an automatic reminder as part of this session. If you don't get automated reminders from your webinar platform, whichever platform you're using, then get the email list of the people who have registered and send them out yourselves. We find if they go a day or so beforehand, it makes a big difference to the number of people who turn up. So reminders well worth using. That's it from me. I'm just going to hand back over to Dario.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, so I'll try to quickly go through issues about running actual live session. Well, first start with welcome and housekeeping. That means explaining ways of interacting with presenters. Safe session will be recorded, which Chris, I think we've missed to do today. But it's so common for us that the sessions are recorded that we just haven't said it, but it is.
I'm recorded. Yeah, I'm recording.
Okay, that's good. Thanks. Then introducing the presenters, that can be part of that moderator's role, giving an overview of the session. Start with an icebreaker. We are using oftentimes polls for that. And then turning on webcams can be done on the start of the session, which helps kind of encourages rapport between presenters and moderator and kind of gives a face to that session in a way. And also it can be turned on during between presentations or for Q&A. We usually advise not to have that webcams on during the actual presentation, so to keep the focus of learners on the presentation itself. Well, good presentations are preferably not more than 10 to 15 minutes per section. Too many slides are often a risk. As organizers, it's a good thing to check with presenters in advance how many slides they have, so that you can intervene on time rather than get surprised and get 50-slide deck for a 60-minute session, which is often, of course, too many. keeping the learner's attention through polls, quizzes, surveys, questions and answers throughout the session. That's, at least for webinars, what you can do. Another thing that is helpful is to have to have more presenters, or more than one presenter or perspective. Sometimes we do a combination of subject matter expert talking about a topic and then a user sharing their experience around that topic. So that kind of also increases the interest of learners during the session. Tech support, Chris already mentioned some of them. It involves switching between presenters or screen sharing. If you have more than one, usually you have. Running interactivities like polls, muting, unmuting participants. During virtual workshops, starting and closing breakout rooms. Chris has some experience on that, and it is a bit of a jugglery, isn't it? And responding to tech issues, that's, it's multitasking, and really you need to keep an eye on so many different things. So it is difficult to be both tech support and moderator. So we do prefer that we get someone who can moderate the session, introduce, keep an eye on questions, where we keep an eye on tech issues. So the more hands you get basically on the session, the better, but not too many, of course. And then just step in if there are any problems. I mean, people sometimes are afraid or hesitant to step in if there's something wrong, if a presenter is gone on mute, or there's a problem with slides, presenter can't share the slides. It's important that you have backup as an organizer, so you can actually switch back to your screen and run the slides, which did happen once to me, but yeah, it went okay eventually. The moderator, we said, introducing the session. Of course, good timekeeping is important, handling the question. In terms of questions, we found that good moderation includes not only just reading the questions aloud, but also commenting, taking part in the discussion in a way. Of course, that requires a moderator who is at least somewhat familiar with the topic. So we have good experiences, for example, with statistical methods group with whom we run some webinars. And usually we have a co-convener of the statistical methods group who is a moderator. And of course, they are familiar with the topic, so they can really get into the discussion and moderation of the kind that we like, and the wrap up eventually at the end. For breakout rooms in virtual workshops, preparation and piloting is essential, and also briefing facilitators on how to run the small group discussions. Chris will at the end, we'll talk about what we'll share with you, but one of the things we'll hope to share or plan to share is one of the schedules for the virtual workshops, and you'll see how facilitators are briefed on what to do during this discussion, or small group discussion, including things like share your screen. As a facilitator, you share a screen, invite everyone to turn on cameras, facilitate discussion, and take and share notes. That's all. And then sometimes report back in the plenary. Finally, sharing and improving is an important part of the whole plan and delivery of live online learning. Evaluation, think and plan to send a simple evaluation within 1 day after the session. We usually send a very simple questions like, what did you like about this session and what could have been better? We prefer qualitative answers, people talking, what they liked and what they didn't like. That helps us improve next time and change things for better, rather than say ranking or grading 1 to 5 or something. Of course, if you can record and share webinars, of course, afterwards, it's very useful resource. Many people do and come back to those recordings and watch them. So if you can do that, but also we advise if you can edit them, because it's difficult to watch for a 1 hour, 60-minute non-stop recording. It's better to slice it in smaller sections depending on the content you have of the webinar. We use Camtasia. We add intro and outro slides to make them look nicer. And we sometimes improve the audio quality. We edit some things out. For example, I usually edit polls out because they work fine during the live session, but for those who are watching the recording, polls are usually kind of not really interesting part. And yeah, you can afterwards share other accompanying materials like slides. People usually ask whether slides will be shared afterwards, handouts, if any, links to any relevant resources that can all be packed together with the recordings in a small resource, new resource, learning resource that can be used afterwards. Okay, so summary of all that we've covered today. Online learning may be delivered in different formats, synchronous or asynchronous. When you plan for those things, think about learning content, what you want to deliver, what's your audience and what's their learning needs, and then select the format and platform rather than other way around. Good online learning requires a lot of preparation, and therefore you should plan for enough time. You should communicate with everyone involved, including presenters and registrants, attendees in various ways, and test, pilot whatever is needed and how much is needed. Introduce variety into online learning sessions to keep the attention of the audience. If you can, record those sessions and turn it into asynchronous learning resources.